Welcome to CIPHER. What you're about to hear will shatter everything you thought you knew about November 22nd, 1963. This isn't about a lone gunman. This isn't about a tragic moment in American history. This is about a carefully orchestrated coup that reached the highest levels of government, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. November 22nd, 1963. Dallas, Texas, 12:29 p.m. The first shot missed, the second shot hit. But the third shot, the kill shot, didn't come from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. It came from the Grassy Knoll, fired by a professional assassin who disappeared into the crowd and vanished from history. But his identity wasn't lost. It was buried by the same people who ordered the president's death. The phone call came to CIA headquarters in Langley exactly 17 minutes after Kennedy was pronounced dead. The voice was calm, professional. "Package delivered," he said. "Cleanup in progress." The man on the other end of that call was Allen Dulles, the CIA director that Kennedy had fired after the Bay of Pigs disaster. Dulles had been waiting for this call for 2 years. But this story doesn't begin in Dallas. It begins in a secure conference room in Washington, D.C., 18 months earlier. May 15, 1962. The Pentagon. A meeting so classified that it was never recorded in any official log, attended by men whose names would never appear on any visitor registry. CIA Director Allen Dulles, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, Joint Chiefs Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer, and a handful of defense contractors who stood to lose billions if Kennedy's policies continued. The topic was simple. President Kennedy had to be stopped. His refusal to escalate in Vietnam was costing defense contractors hundreds of millions in projected profits. His attempts to negotiate with Soviet Premier Khrushchev threatened the entire foundation of the military-industrial complex. And his threats to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces posed an existential threat to America's intelligence apparatus. The decision was made that day. John F. Kennedy would not complete his first term. The operation would be called Executive Action, and it would be the most sophisticated assassination plot in American history. The first recruit was Lee Harvey Oswald, but not in the way the Warren Commission would later claim. Oswald wasn't a communist sympathizer or a lone wolf. He was a CIA asset who had been under agency control since his defection to the Soviet Union in 1959. That defection wasn't an act of political rebellion. It was a deep cover operation designed to establish Oswald's credentials as a Soviet agent. Oswald's handler was George de Mohrenschildt, a wealthy businessman with connections to both the CIA and the oil industry. De Mohrenschildt's job was to guide Oswald's actions, establish his presence in Dallas, and ensure he would be in the right place at the right time to serve as the perfect patsy for Kennedy's assassination. But Oswald wasn't supposed to be the only shooter. He wasn't even supposed to be the primary shooter. His job was to create noise, confusion, and a clear line of evidence that would lead investigators to a predetermined conclusion. The real assassins were professionals, recruited from a network of former military snipers and contract killers who had worked for the CIA in Guatemala, Cuba, and Southeast Asia. The operation required precise timing and coordination. Kennedy's motorcade route through Dallas was changed at the last minute to ensure it would pass directly in front of the school book depository, giving Oswald clear sight lines and establishing his presence at the scene. But more importantly, the route was designed to slow the presidential limousine to walking speed at the exact moment it reached the kill zone. The kill zone wasn't random. It was carefully selected for its tactical advantages. The grassy knoll provided elevated firing positions with clear escape routes. The triple underpass offered acoustic confusion that would mask the direction of gunshots, and the presence of multiple tall buildings created crossfire opportunities that would ensure the president couldn't survive, even if the first shots missed. On the morning of November 22nd, the assassination team was already in position. The primary shooter, a former Marine sniper named James Files, had taken position behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll. Files had been recruited specifically for this operation because of his expertise with the Remington XP-100, a specialized pistol capable of firing rifle-caliber ammunition with deadly accuracy at close range. The secondary shooter was positioned on the 6th floor of the Dal-Tex Building, directly across from the school book depository. This shooter, whose identity remains classified, was armed with a Mauser rifle and tasked with providing backup in case the primary shot failed. The coordination between these shooters was managed through encrypted radio communications monitored by CIA operatives positioned throughout Dealey Plaza. But the most crucial element of the operation wasn't the shooters or the weapons. It was the cover-up, which began before Kennedy was even pronounced dead. Within minutes of the shooting, evidence was being altered, witnesses were being intimidated, and the official narrative was being constructed by operatives who had planned every aspect of the aftermath. The first piece of evidence to disappear was the president's brain, which was secretly removed from Bethesda Naval Hospital during the autopsy. The brain contained conclusive proof that Kennedy had been shot from the front, not from behind, as the Warren Commission would later claim. The brain was destroyed, and the autopsy photographs were altered to support the lone gunman theory. But the most disturbing aspect of the cover-up was the systematic elimination of witnesses who had seen or heard things that contradicted the official story. Dorothy Kilgallen, the journalist who had interviewed Jack Ruby and claimed to have explosive information about the assassination, died of a suspicious drug overdose in 1965. David Ferry, a CIA operative connected to Oswald, died of a brain aneurysm just days before he was scheduled to testify in the Clay Shaw trial. The pattern of convenient deaths continued for years. Rose Cheremy, who had predicted Kennedy's assassination before it happened, was killed in a hit-and-run accident. Gary Underhill, a CIA operative who claimed the agency had killed Kennedy, was found shot to death in what was ruled a suicide despite the fact that he was shot behind the left ear with his right hand. Karen Kupcinet, who had reportedly overheard conversations about a plot to kill Kennedy, was found murdered in her apartment. But the most significant witness elimination involved the man who knew the complete truth about the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald himself. Oswald's murder by Jack Ruby wasn't a spontaneous act of patriotic revenge. It was a carefully planned execution, designed to silence the one person who could expose the entire conspiracy. Jack Ruby, born Jacob Rubenstein, had connections to both organized crime and the CIA. Ruby's role in the assassination wasn't limited to killing Oswald. He had been involved in the operation from the beginning, providing logistical support and serving as a liaison between the conspirators and organized crime figures who had their own reasons for wanting Kennedy dead. The evidence of Ruby's deeper involvement was suppressed by the Warren Commission, but it included financial records showing payments from CIA front companies, communication logs documenting his contact with assassination conspirators, and testimony from witnesses who saw Ruby in locations where he shouldn't have been in the days leading up to Kennedy's death. The Warren Commission itself was designed not to investigate the assassination, but to validate a predetermined conclusion that would protect the institutions and individuals responsible for Kennedy's murder. The commission was stacked with establishment figures who had conflicts of interest and vested interests in maintaining the official narrative. Chief Justice Earl Warren, who led the commission, was told by Lyndon Johnson that revealing the truth about Kennedy's assassination could lead to nuclear war with the Soviet Union. This was a lie, but it was effective in convincing Warren to suppress evidence and limit the scope of the investigation. The other commission members were similarly manipulated through a combination of patriotic appeals and veiled threats. The commission's investigation was hampered from the beginning by the CIA's refusal to provide complete information about its operations and personnel. Allen Dulles, who served on the commission despite his obvious conflict of interest, actively worked to steer the investigation away from CIA involvement. Documents that could have exposed the truth were classified, destroyed, or altered to support the lone gunman theory. But the most damaging suppression involved the Commission's refusal to investigate the forensic evidence that proved Kennedy was shot from multiple directions. The Zapruder film, which clearly showed Kennedy's head snapping backward after the fatal shot, was kept from public view for years. When it was finally released, the film had been altered to obscure the most damaging evidence. The acoustic evidence was similarly suppressed. Multiple witnesses reported hearing shots from the Grassy Knoll, and dictabelt recordings from Dallas police radio captured sounds consistent with gunfire from multiple locations. This evidence was dismissed by the Warren Commission and later suppressed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations when it contradicted their predetermined conclusions. The medical evidence was the most conclusively altered. The autopsy photographs and X-rays were manipulated to show entry wounds consistent with shots from behind, when the original evidence showed clear indicators of frontal shots. The pathologists who performed the autopsy were pressured to change their conclusions, and those who refused were transferred or discredited. The ballistics evidence was equally compromised. The so-called magic bullet that supposedly caused multiple wounds in both Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally was planted at Parkland Hospital by FBI agents. The bullet was pristine, showing no signs of the damage it would have sustained if it had actually caused the wounds attributed to it. But perhaps the most significant piece of suppressed evidence was the testimony of the Parkland Hospital medical staff who treated Kennedy. These experienced trauma surgeons unanimously described Kennedy's throat wound as an entry wound, indicating he had been shot from the front. Their testimony was ignored by the Warren Commission, and later pressure was applied to force them to change their statements. The cover-up extended beyond suppressing evidence to actively creating false evidence. The famous photograph of Oswald holding a rifle and communist newspapers was a composite created by CIA photo specialists. The rifle supposedly used in the assassination was planted in the school book depository after the shooting, and the backyard photographs were staged to establish Oswald's connection to the weapon. The creation of false evidence required the cooperation of multiple government agencies and media organizations. The FBI provided forensic cover by manufacturing ballistics evidence and suppressing witness testimony. The Secret Service destroyed evidence and altered the presidential limousine before it could be properly examined. And media outlets actively promoted the lone gunman theory while ignoring evidence that contradicted it. The most sophisticated aspect of the cover-up was the manipulation of public perception through psychological operations designed to discredit anyone who questioned the official narrative. The term conspiracy theorist was popularized by CIA operatives specifically to stigmatize legitimate researchers who were uncovering evidence of the assassination plot. This psychological operation was so successful that even today, 60 years after Kennedy's death, the majority of Americans believe the official story despite overwhelming evidence that it's false. The operation demonstrated the power of coordinated media manipulation and psychological warfare to control public perception of historical events. But the cover-up began unraveling in the 1970s when the Church Committee investigations revealed the extent of CIA domestic operations and assassination programs. Documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests provided evidence of CIA involvement in foreign assassinations and domestic surveillance programs that had been used to monitor and intimidate assassination researchers. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, formed in 1976, was initially intended to conduct a genuine reinvestigation of Kennedy's murder. The committee's acoustic analysis concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, but this finding was quickly suppressed, and the committee's final report was altered to minimize its implications. The committee's chief counsel, Richard Sprague, was fired when he attempted to investigate CIA connections to the assassination. His replacement, Robert Blakey, had previous connections to organized crime investigations and steered the committee toward concluding that the mafia was responsible for Kennedy's death, deflecting attention from government involvement. The acoustic evidence that convinced the committee of a conspiracy was later attacked by government scientists who claimed the analysis was flawed. but independent researchers have since validated the original findings and discovered additional evidence of multiple shooters that was never presented to the committee. The most significant breakthrough in assassination research came in the 1990s, when the Assassination Records Review Board was created to release government documents related to Kennedy's death. These releases revealed extensive CIA and FBI surveillance of Oswald, connections between assassination figures and intelligence operations, and evidence of systematic document destruction that had hidden the truth for decades. The released documents confirmed that Oswald had intelligence connections dating back to his military service, that multiple government agencies had advanced knowledge of threats to Kennedy's life, and that the investigation was compromised from the beginning by officials who had conflicts of interest and hidden agendas. But the most explosive revelations came from documents that remained classified or heavily redacted. These documents, according to researchers who have seen them, contain evidence of direct CIA involvement in planning and executing Kennedy's assassination, including communications between assassination conspirators and payments made to operatives involved in the plot. The continued classification of these documents, 60 years after Kennedy's death, demonstrates that the cover-up is ongoing, and that powerful interests remain committed to hiding the truth about who killed the president and why. The national security justifications for this secrecy are false. The real reason for continued classification is to protect the reputations and institutions of those responsible for the crime. Today, the evidence of conspiracy in Kennedy's assassination is overwhelming and undeniable. The forensic evidence, witness testimony, and documentary record all point to the same conclusion. John F. Kennedy was killed by a sophisticated plot involving elements of the CIA, organized crime, and defense contractors who saw his policies as threats to their interests. The assassination succeeded in achieving its objectives. Kennedy's successor, Lyndon Johnson, reversed Kennedy's policies on Vietnam, expanded the military-industrial complex, and restored the CIA's power and influence. The lessons of Dallas were clear. Presidents who challenge the established power structure do so at their own peril. But the ultimate legacy of Kennedy's assassination isn't just the death of a president. It's the death of American democracy itself. The successful cover-up demonstrated that powerful interests could commit the ultimate crime against the Republic and face no consequences, establishing a precedent for government lawlessness that continues to this day. The phone call that announced "package delivered" wasn't just reporting Kennedy's death. It was announcing the birth of a new America, where the real power rested not with elected officials, but with unelected operatives who could eliminate anyone who threatened their control. And in that America, the truth about November 22, 1963, would remain forever encrypted, accessible only to those brave enough to decode the lies. This is CIPHER, where every shot fired in Dallas echoes through history, and every truth suppressed demands justice. Subscribe for daily investigations that challenge the official narrative and expose the conspiracies that shaped our world. Because in the end, the most dangerous enemy of democracy isn't foreign invasion or domestic terrorism. It's the willingness to kill truth itself.